In this chapter, chapter 37, we're talking about why the education that you're receiving right now in the place setting of the University of Hawaii, why is it so expensive? Not just the University of Hawaii is expensive, right? It's that all universities are generally expensive. I guess I would say, though, are they really? I guess it's kind of what I'm not sure I would say is why is it so expensive. Rather, it's that a person is transitioning from if they made use of K to 12 public education, which is free, and then transitioning to something where you pay a tuition, then yeah, it seems expensive. And there are extremes, right? Like we've got Ivy League schools like Dartmouth and Columbia, where the tuition alone is 75, $80,000 a year. Throw in room and board, and you're at close to 100,000 a year. Um, and then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, rather inexpensive um, universities, state schools. Um, One would argue, even like a school like um, University of Hawaii West Oahu, which you might be thinking I sound crazy, but at 10K a year in tuition, more or less, that's pretty inexpensive um, compared to other state schools. I'm trying to think of what's probably the cheapest, the least expensive state school, I think, is Wyoming, I think. Yeah, $5,700. Is that per semester or is that per year? Looks like it might actually be about as expensive as West Oahu. No. Wow, that is pretty cheap. Take out all the room and board and all the other shit. Just tuition, $5,000 a year. I think that is among the least expensive for University of Hawaii, Wyoming. Um, it's pretty darn cheap. Um, why? Right? Why? What's the nature of going to a state school versus going to a public school? Those are the things that we're going to talk about here. So, higher education is there's a lot of adults, young adults, that are going through that system um, at a cost of about $500 billion. Um, and obviously, things like room and board and tuition are all rising faster than inflation, dramatically so. So, um, a person going for higher education basically is presented with one of two choices. Are they going to go to a public school or private? Right? Each state does have a state sponsored university. Here in Hawaii, the tuition's actually only covering um, about 30 to 40% of the total cost of running this university. Most of the cost, about 60%, is actually just provided as a direct subsidy. So, for instance, my salary as a professor, um, my salary is actually paid for by the state, not out of tuition. So, the way the University of Hawaii system works, lecturers or adjuncts, non permanent professors, their salary is paid for by your tuition. Mine is not. Um, Mine is just directly coming from the state. Um, when you're talking about a private school, well, let me take a step back. For public state universities, you're getting funding from student tuition, you're getting funding from the state, and you're getting funding from the federal government. Private schools are getting most of their funding from tuition, another chunk from a sizable endowment that a school typically has. Basically, like think of it as a big savings account or investment account, and then the um, federal government does provide some funding as well. You can just see here. This is just a chart that just shows to you that textbooks as well as tuition are increasing dramatically faster than inflation, which you all should obviously know. Now, there's a reason why you should be paying to go to college. There's a private benefit that goes to you. This is just like what we looked at in K to 12 education. You know that you will get a better job, a job that pays even more, by going to college and graduating. So there is a private benefit, but there's also a social benefit. The fact that you're going to earn more, so that means you'll pay more taxes. Now you're even less likely to do a crime and other kinds of things. So there's a reason why the state government, state of Hawaii, and why the federal government provides a benefit for these things. Now the costs are higher. I mean, I teach less as a college professor. Um, I am well compensated. I guess that's the best way to put it. I mean, I have a doctorate. I went to school myself for. I have a PhD in economics. My alternatives would compensate me even better if I were to go into banking. Maybe like my colleagues in English and music and whatnot don't have those options, but it is what it is. I teach three classes a semester, so six courses a year. Not a lot. Most of my job is a slight majority of my job is teaching, but for the most part, um, when you buy Shiting or any professor for that matter, you're buying the whole package. You're buying their ability to teach. You're buying their ability to advise and create in my case, an economics program. But you're also buying the fact that I conduct research as well. So I am under requirements to produce a certain number of publications a year. On the Manoa campus, we have requirements to generate a certain amount of income from grants every year. The cost of doing business is basically greater when you're at a university than when you're at a K to 12 school. So that's part of the reason why the tuition is higher. The costs are higher. And again, you see this year. So this is, well, for 1995, where the appropriation is coming from the state. That's over half, and that's still true to this day. But again, the tuition is not paying for most of that. Now, the shift that happens is that tuition is having to cover more of this. And so that is the shift from I actually entered the college. I entered college in 1995. So this is more like what it was when I entered as opposed to today, where states again are cutting back and funding other priorities, after the financial crisis and leaving it up to students to pay for things. Now, different states have had different strategies. Let's look at actually some of the data here. So, academics have a newspaper called the Chronicle of Higher Education. Let's look at the data section here. And I want to look at the information by state. Um, And so here we can see what states are spending and how that's changing per year. And look at Hawaii, up 4.2%, as opposed to a state like Colorado, which cut their funding by 45%. Let's just sort this by increase. Vermont, Michigan, Washington, Virginia, Connecticut, Hawaii. Hawaii here at 4.2. So we're in the top, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I came to the University of Hawaii system from the University of Wisconsin. Why did I come here from the University of Wisconsin? Well, in part, my wife was from here, but also I was at a state which was generally defunding its public education system, higher education system. So I'm going to guess Wisconsin's going to be somewhere lower. Now here it's only up by 1.1, but it was actually negative when I was there. So each of these states do have a state higher educational system that are just providing straight grants. So that's kind of this middle column here. Oh, actually here, let's sort by who's the cheapest. Okay, Florida is actually cheaper than Wyoming. It's pretty crazy. And look at that. You actually have a number of schools. Actually, when you start here in California, where the 2-year institutions, community college system, is rather affordable and accessible at $1,200 a year, as opposed to, I guess here in this case, New Hampshire at $7,100. In Hawaii, we're cheap, like Leeward and HCC and whatnot. They're cheap, not super cheap though. Okay, let's go back here. And so we can see that the revenue for universities is going up, but it's largely coming from, on the public side, for public higher ed, it's largely coming from students paying more in tuition. The other forms of state support have not increased as much. Now, the other side of this as well is that textbooks are expensive. This one's a tough one for me because there's actually a pretty interesting movement that's going on in the University of Hawaii system called OER, which stands for Open Educational Resources, which is textbooks that are free. Now, I've been actually pretty active in this movement here at the University of Hawaii, developing textbooks and whatnot. So if you look at this, we go to economics. So we have just a general textbook here. And then let's go to principles of macroeconomics. And so principles of macroeconomics, we also have a general textbook here. And many of you, certainly before the crisis, you would have had, we would have used a book. But the benefit is that, dude, the whole book is right there. It's the whole book. You don't have to buy anything. It's a free PDF. And so in disciplines like economics, you can do this because the book is pretty standard. Here we've got the principles of economics. This would be the kind of combined book with the two. And then we even got some money to make a Hawaii edition. And in the Hawaii edition, the examples are, I don't know. They're just, they are Hawaii examples. And so you can see here, in terms of the authors, there's a lot of individuals involved in it at the university system. And you can see that there are other textbooks here, statistics, college success, botany, human nutrition, mathematics. Um, and so these are free books. Now, the problem with the free book is that it's not as fancy. Um, and so the challenge then, at least for me during COVID, has been that all these ancillaries, like the PowerPoints, like this PowerPoint that we're seeing, test banks, instructor manuals. I mean, I don't use the test banks and instructor manuals, but I actually kind of need the PowerPoints. And I need a textbook in this case for this course where there is no, this course isn't taught a lot like principles of economics is. And so because it's not taught a lot, there is no free alternative. But as you can see here, there's a lot of areas where there are free textbooks. Think of the access that provides the student who's having a struggle paying for college, right? Wouldn't it be kind of nice to have the textbook for free? Yeah, kind of. You got some here in business. That's kind of an expanding area, right? They got accounting. Think about that free accounting book. Wouldn't that be so much better than the very expensive book you have? And again, the problem is that there's a textbook, but then like the homework system's not there. And as many of you know, many professors rely on that homework system to kind of drive the material, especially during COVID. And therein lies the problem, right? The professor doesn't pay for the book, they just assign the book and they get it for free, not thinking about what it costs students. And most professors don't even give a shit. Um, these textbooks are revised on a pretty frequent basis, and it's not that the book itself is expensive. Paper's pretty cheap. That's kind of our variable cost. What's expensive is putting the book together, right? You got to put authors in a room, they write it, and then other professors have to get in on it and start making the other materials. And that costs money. Um, not sure why they're introducing this to you here. Um, you don't need to worry about this. We're not. Actually, you know what? I actually like. They actually did tell us here. Um, I think the book actually did cost $200 in print edition. Um, yeah, I mean, look at who's making the money here, and where is the money going to? This is actually pretty interesting, and this is actually pretty accurate. So you've got a book, and yes, there is ink, paper, and printing costs, which is pretty minimal. Which, if you think about it, why do publishers seem to be pushing the option of you buying a digital book? Well, because then they save on that. They do two things. One, they save on the printing cost, but two, typically your access goes away after like 90 days or 180 days. And so then you have to buy the book again, right? Someone else has to buy the book again as opposed to buying a used copy of the book. Now, what you see here, the author's not making the bulk of the money. They're making about 10%. Rather, the bookstore is making a lot of money, which is why the bookstore, for instance, for this course, loved doing that IDAP thing because then they make sure that they get their markup in there. And then the publisher charges their costs as well. You gotta say this for the authors. At least they told us what things cost. And again, the used book market is pretty. The publishers are trying to basically remove that market by making the books be digital, so that they can make more money. um, the publisher wants to be the primary agent involved in making the book, and not have a used book out there that someone else can buy. And as I said, most faculty members, not me, but most faculty members do not care what the book costs. Most do not know what the book costs. I'm a bit unusual because if we look at our course, and we look at the syllabus, we obviously, right, I picked this book, but then right, I don't remember which video I talked about it in, but in one of the videos, I talked about why it's the case, um, that you need to buy the book. Um, in this case, it's that you've got a resource. I understand the amount that you're paying for the book, and that I want to make sure that that I know why it costs what it does, and to make sure that we use the book so that you feel like you got your money's worth. Um, and so I do that here, but I don't want you to think that I didn't try to look online and try to find a free copy, a PDF, from someone else, like someone posting the 8th edition as a digital file for free. Sometimes I try to do that in a course just because I'm not using the other things, but that's pretty small. Um, the issue too is, right, what are you trying to buy? For some of you, you actually don't care about the book. You have to get the book because you need to be able to do the homeworks, because you need that homework system. You can't do the homework without buying the book. So there's where the student decision is limited. Um, and it's just harder to learn the material. If you didn't have the book for this class, I'm talking about these lectures here, but it might be harder to do the work if you have nothing to read. So you end up having to buy the book. Um, I don't know why they keep going on about books here. I guess maybe because they. Let me make this the last slide here. This course is unusual. It's a pretty unusual course. Not a lot of schools have a course where we just talk about like areas of interest, contemporary topics. And so, because of that, because it's largely a monopoly, you've really only got a few choices, and you've got to go with that book. As opposed to monopolistic competition, like the Principles, the 130, Econ 130, Econ 131 book, where you do have lots of choices. And so, because you have lots of choices, the books are sometimes a bit cheaper. There's not much more to say about this, and you don't worry about this slide. So, we know what the cost is to a college education. Let's talk about the benefit to that college education. Um, well, and I guess we should say too. The biggest cost to a college education is the fact that you have to spend all that time going to school, and that would be time that you can't spend working. right? If you're in school, even if you're working full time and going to school full time at the same time, you could be working two jobs then instead of going to school. So that's really the biggest cost is the kind of the present day cost of why you're doing going to school. You're doing it though because you're expecting that you're going to recoup that value in the future um, when you have that college degree. The worst case scenario would be is if you don't get a job that matches your higher qualifications, because then you've basically spent all your time going to school and then not getting a job that required the skills that you learned while going to college. That would be the worst case scenario. Um, don't listen to the net present value here. It doesn't not really accurate anymore. Okay, so, but I mean, for most of you, you know why you're going to school. Most of you are not going to college. Most of you, I'm not saying all of you, but most of you are not going to college because you want to live a learned life. You want to read the classics or anything like that. You, for the most part, want to have economic security and economic benefits that maybe your parents didn't have because they didn't go to school, or because you've been basically brainwashed to know that if you don't go to school, you're not going to earn as much money. Now I say brainwashed because you don't. I mean, it should be said here, you don't have to go to college to have a stable career. You can be a carpenter, you can be a welder, dude. If you're a welder, you would do very well for yourself in Hawaii and really anywhere. You don't need to. You go to high school, you do some practical training on how to weld, and there you go. You didn't have to go to school just to get that economic security, but you probably have to enjoy welding. You're a carpenter, a plumber, any kinds of technical trades that I'm talking about here. You could go to community college to learn them, but for the most part, you don't need the community. The time you spend in community college will be basically the time you spend doing the technical training. So let's look at that. So let's look at our friends over in Leeward. Right. So let's say that I'm in high school, and let's say that I'm not really sure what I want to do. I just want to get a career. Automotive tech, right? I don't know. I could learn to work on Fords. It looks like, and I could make a car joke and say, "Yeah, Fords are pieces of shit cars, so they do need someone to work on them all the time." But you're going to see right as I scroll down here, there's some things like management, which is you would need to go to school to kind of do. But then there'd be other things where, um, sorry, I'm just trying to look for. Mm, sorry, I know what I want. Honolulu Community College. That's the one that has the most um, programs of study. And here we go. Right, when I work on a plane engine, applied trades like I don't know. This guy's putting together something about bathroom tiles. It looks like automotive body repair and painting, automotive technology, carpenter, computer security, haircuts, early childhood, diesel mechanic, electrical installation, fashion tech, fireman, firewoman, um, sheet metal and plastics, refrigeration, small vessel fabrication, and my favorite, the welders. Now let's see how long I have to study to be a welder. I know I'm really wasting your time here, but I'm not trying to. So look at that. You take English 100, Math 50, um, and basically in 2 years, over 2 years, you pay a total of $1,500, and that's for your textbooks, your tools, and all your supplies. $1,500. You pay your tuition, and you'll have a job for life, basically, as a welder. Um, you'll become an entry level welder. Um, Not bad. So how do we pay for this? And there's where most of the problem does come in. We know that the federal government is pretty involved in paying for higher ed. They provide both grants. That would be Pell Grants is the primary one. Pell Grants are grants for children from poor families. And then we have the GI Bill. That would be if you're a veteran or a child of a veteran who hasn't used the benefits themselves, where the Veterans Administration, the VA, will pay the tuition. But the biggest way that the primary source of financial aid comes in the form of loans from the federal government that are both subsidized or unsubsidized. If it's subsidized, that means that the government pays the interest while you're in school. If it's unsubsidized, that means that the government does not pay the interest while you're in school. Um, and then we've got obviously the state appropriations that come from the state of Hawaii, and then it's your own payments. Now, not every school is the same, right? So, for instance, I'm trying to focus on my. Um, so, for instance, for like my middle son who's deaf, in this case, there is no state university that teaches deaf children. So, in this case, the federal government formed a university for um, deaf college students. And the fun fact about Gallaudet University is that the president of the United States actually signs the diploma because it is a national. I thought there was a sorry, you probably you probably think that my lectures here are pieces of shit because I'm like on these like random things here, but um I can't find it. I'm not going to care. No, I can't find it. But there is somewhere where it does show that the um oh yeah, here it is. You can find the one that's signed by Ulysses S. Grant or Chester A. Arthur. um, he didn't live very, yeah, this guy did. James Garfield. Wow, James Garfield lived, I guess, to have the May commencement. Let's see what the diploma looked like. Did he even have one? No, they don't even have one. Sorry. No examples from James Garfield. Um, let's see one from Roosevelt. There we go. Doesn't matter. But yeah, if you look right here, there we go. Theodore Roosevelt signed the diploma. Now, again, what this is representing is an exception to the rule that higher education is financed. In this case, there's again an agreement that or an understanding that a college student who is deaf, if they don't have a choice at the state level, then there needed to be a federal government role in providing education to that kind of college student. It's an exception to the rule, though. For the most part, states to varying degrees realize that they have a responsibility to provide some of the payment, and the federal government, primarily through loans, provides the payment. Um, it's the loans that are obviously the big debate right now, and this we don't have to look too far for, like, what was her name? Elizabeth something. Elizabeth Warren. Her like big thing was um, that student loans should be um, canceled by the government, right? That basically the government would basically say, "Oh, sorry, you don't actually owe any money." Um, I can't type things in here; it won't let me. But if you type in um, student loans as even a news article, the big debate right now is whether Biden is empowered to forgive all student loans. Some say he is, some say he isn't, some say he is, but that he shouldn't. Um, having student loans is kind of a rite of passage, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't become burdensome to pay for that um, once you then start off in the real world, right? At a time when you're then having kids and buying a house and all those kinds of things, depending on the degree that you got, you might end up having a very expensive degree. How expensive could it be? Well, actually, the Wall Street Journal's got a pretty good listing here. Mm, they actually had really good data. So we have some forgiveness portions right here. Um, Sorry, I can't really find it. But the primary ones where individuals pay a lot would be like a master's degree in psychology, um, a master's in public policy, where um, pretty much it's loans that are paying for it. And it's uncertain how much better of a job you get by having a master's degree as opposed to your bachelor's degree. Unfortunately, for you all, it's not that rare to have a college degree anymore. Um, I say unfortunately for you because what it means is that there has been this increase then in the educational requirements for jobs, right? That I don't want to just say simple jobs, but jobs that in the past didn't require a college degree now all of a sudden do. And it's not entirely clear that you need a college degree to do that job. But in some sense, you almost need to do it that way because across racial categories, as we see in this chart here, is individuals are getting their college degree. Now, why do more white people have a college degree than black or Hispanic? Quite simply, it's access to money. Um, not necessarily loans. It used to be the case that you'd had to qualify for the loan. You don't have to qualify for a loan. There's no credit check or anything when you get a college loan, a student loan. The government backs that loan. It makes it nearly impossible to declare bankruptcy, for instance, and get out of that loan. No, it's that white people have more resources typically and can pay the things that grants and loans don't cover, but they have parents that can cover the other expenses while the person's in school so that they graduate successfully. They're not as likely to drop out as others would because of like financial troubles coming up. Um, the subsidization. So we here at West Oahu, we are considered a regional public university. Manoa would be our flagship campus. Um, and this is a pretty interesting slide here. And it's not, just by reading this slide, it wouldn't be entirely clear here. But the conclusion that comes from this slide is that when the state of Hawaii, for instance, is making its appropriation, its money would go farther and produce more results if it went to West Oahu, where um, the subsidy for every dollar spent by students, if we had a subsidy of 85 cents by the state, we could get further state support for that school and generate better results than typically like the flagship again, like Manoa, where for every dollar spent by students, the state is providing 65 cents of a subsidy, and the expectation or the hope there is that the faculty members are then generating grants and other things to cover the rest of the expenses. So a school like West Oahu is a little bit more subsidized by the state than Manoa, at least in terms of generating positive results. Now, the biggest shift here, and I certainly see this when I hear about some of the financial aid packages that exist out there. The problem is that it's just almost all loans nowadays, and that's just unfortunate. Um, I don't know what your individual student loan package looks like, but it's probably a lot of it is loan. And that's just unfortunate because those loans then define your immediate years after college. And unfortunately, all the actors, not myself, I'm just a professor, I guess. The only thing I can really control here is the cost of the book. But I'm thinking of the administrators at any university spend money that's basically not theirs. They're spending your money and they're spending the state's money, saying we need this and we need that. Well, the question would be: is do we really need that? Um, Not denigrating it. Good thing we saw in the other lecture. I have tenure, so I can kind of say what I want. Um, I don't know. I look at the one like creative media, right? A really expensive building on this campus, very expensive equipment, very expensive building. But there's not a lot of students in it. And then I look at another program, like for instance, oh, one like education or even early childhood education, subsidized less, um, and doesn't have its own building, shares the building with everyone else, um, where we might think that the benefits might be greater to develop that kind of program a little bit more than creative media. Why did West Oahu get a creative media building? It's politics, which shouldn't surprise you too much. You have a trustee, or I think he's a former trustee. Well, I don't know. He became something important in Hollywood. I don't remember what he did. Um, well, he's got his own Wikipedia page, so let's look at it. Superman Returns. I guess that's about the only movie I've seen of this list. I haven't seen any of these. But he made a lot of money doing whatever he did. And so, because he made a lot of money doing whatever he did, we got. Oh, yeah, this is kind of the article that if you want to see this fancy looking building, you'd scroll down and you would see. I think there's a picture in here where they show, like, I guess they don't show it in this one. Well, here you go, though. It's a 33,000 square foot educational hub. 100-seat screening room, mixing stage, esports arena, post-production suite, emerging media lab, incubator space, sound stage. How much did it cost? 37 million bucks. I'm not critiquing it. I'm just saying, here's your tuition. Now, it's not all your tuition, but um, uh, what I'm saying is that the costs of this is just a program I'm talking about. I'm not trying to single it out. I'm just saying that um, I'm not certain that students asked for this. Some of you may have, some of you did not. Um, and yet we have it, and it's pretty expensive. It used to be the case that the United States led the world in terms of our access to the higher education system. We do have the highest quality higher education system in the world. We are the system that the best and brightest from every country comes to. Um, but we are also the most expensive. In other countries, higher education is a state right, just like K to 12 is a right of citizens, just like K to 12 is. Um, and That's not the case in the United States. There is no right to K to 12. Sorry, there is no right to college education, unlike there is in a country like Germany, England, France, where individuals do have that right. Okay. That does it for this chapter.